Hi, Novella Petronella. Hope everyone's having a good, I think it's Friday. So I was listening to this guy the other day. He's a crypto guy. I don't know what his credentials are or whatever, but he's got a channel somewhere. I don't even remember the name of it, but he was talking about how blockchain is going to make people very rich, but at the same time, it's going to enslave them. And it's something that I do think about, and I think it's a possibility, although if we were to never completely escape the slavehood that we're already in our lifetimes, then I guess I'd rather be a wealthy slave than an unwealthy one. But he was talking about the idea of eventually everything concerning people that they would exist pretty much only on the blockchain, like your medical history, your birth records, legal documents, whatever it is, employment record, that essentially you'll be trackable in full on this immutable blockchain. And the honest truth is, I don't know how everything's going to look once the top cryptocurrencies are established and they go to the next level and they become more integrated into everything we do. I mean, I have more questions than I have answers, which I kind of like it that way because I remain teachable. But, you know, things in the world seem to be changing very fast on many levels anyway. Seems like a lot of the power structures are changing for the better. There looks to be a lot of transparency. There's like disclosure happening, whatever you want to call it. I remember 15 years ago reading about stuff that was seemed like it was out of left field, like completely absurd. And not many people were talking about it. It wasn't really being reported on, but now it's being talked about. So that to me is a very good sign that there's more disclosure and more transparency. But I still can't square how there are such deep roots in everything that we do that is still so deeply based in those power structures. Like, I know that many university curriculums have been completely skewed toward a certain perspective by really large donations. You know, we all know how food is mass produced, not necessarily for the health of people, but for, you know, economic reasons, and kind of the same thing with how the healthcare system works, government, the news. There are even micro laws, like on a smaller scale, where you can't collect rainwater in certain places, which, you know, it's illegal to do that. That doesn't seem very free to me. But anyway, I think most of what we see and we hear is a narrative and not what I would call our own narrative, although maybe it makes a lot of us think that it is our own. It's like when a kid says, I want soda, and you say, well, you have a choice. You can have water or juice. And then they choose one, and they're pacified for the time being because they feel like they were free to make a choice, when really it wasn't even their own choice. That's kind of how I see things. But on the other hand, you know, what if blockchain is the absolute best thing to happen to humanity and to people? What if it makes more people free? I don't know. Blockchain as a whole, like, really seems to have unlimited potential. And the VeChain coin, for one, which I don't know a lot about it, but I know it's kind of like within the supply chain realm. You can track something like a luxury product or like food item from the beginning when it was created, kind of like through each step right down the line until it's sold. So you can actually track and stop counterfeit products or like bad food practices, like right where they exist. And then XRP, which is, you know, essentially changing the way that money moves and the speed at which it moves. Or like we're seeing, you know, being used as micropayments with individuals. I mean, I don't know what that's going to blow up at some point, like blogs and the tip bot or whatever. I mean, who knows what that's going to scale to be? I don't know if anyone knows what that's going to be looking like in a couple of years, past financial entities and banks and institutions and stuff like that. Per usual, I don't do price predictions. I wouldn't even know how to begin to do that. I don't know what's best for people. I don't know what people should do, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Enslavement or not enslavement, I'm definitely going to be holding this XRP until the goddamn wheels fall off this country, if that's what has to happen. Or we wake up one day and the price of XRP finally reflects its true beauty and someone says, hey, oh, you didn't know? You're totally free now. No, like you're really free. Happened so slow, you didn't even know it was happening to you. And for me, for the time being, it doesn't matter how low the price of XRP goes right now. It is not moving from my device. I actually might be moving though, because I'm literally losing half of my income in 3 weeks. And most likely I'll lose the house that I rent here. And it's like everything's kind of coming down at one time. It's really odd. If I was to step outside this from like another person's perspective, it would be interesting. It's not as interesting because it's happening to me, but like the IRS has decided that they want a lot of money from me that I don't have, and everyone suddenly seems to need a lot of money that I don't have. And I just don't think I can do another few years of like working 10 to 12 hour days just to live in California. So I might be leaving the state very soon. No idea where I'm going. But it's pretty scary. I think California is an amazing place, but let's be honest, we have wildfires, we have earthquakes, no real rain for the past few years to speak of. We've been in like perpetual drought with no end in sight. And it is very expensive to live here. And I'm very far from my family, which I don't love. But overall, it's just a really weird time for me. And I think part of me is actually, I've been considering leaving to a cheaper state anyway. I mean, for one, I'll be able to accumulate digital currency again. I haven't been able to buy XRP in a while. So if anyone knows of a good, cheaper city that is not California, as long as it's warm, I can't be chipping ice off my windshield in the winter ever again. I've noticed that the price has kind of like only gone lower no matter what happens. I think it went up a tiny bit today, but I really think it's starting to freak people out. I don't know if it was my last video, but one of my most recent videos, Vincent Wilson made a comment about 25,000 XRP being life-changing, and people jumped on that right away because he went up by like 5,000, and they were like, you said 20,000. What do you mean? But between the insane amount of flack that XRP gets from everywhere, yet at the same time, we see all these really good things happening with partnerships and like plans to do this and that. But the price has not gone up substantially. I think sometimes that freaks people out, and I get it. There's a metaphysical concept that I really like. I learned about it years ago from a Florence Scovel Shinn book, and it talks about bad things or people being really just like a link in the chain of your good. That's what she calls it, a link in the chain of your good. So the thought process goes that when something bad happens, you can treat it one of two ways. So it can either be seen as a total negative, like you can write it off, which would be looking at things how they appear to you in the moment, or you can just declare it a link in the chain of your good, and that it's necessary. It's like a transitionary, I don't know what the word is, transitory thing, and that seemingly those things that really seem to you to be so terrible in the moment are just kind of like catalysts to get you to the next step of whatever it is that's supposed to happen in your evolution personally. But usually it's not until you look back and say, oh wow, if that hadn't happened like that, like I never would have gotten to this other thing, whatever that is. So I can see why things happen like that. I was talking to one of my friends last night, and I was just trying to put things into perspective. I think sometimes it's easy when weird life stuff comes up to gravitate toward a not really good attitude about things, which is kind of where I've been the last few days, and I've been pretty freaked out about this. So I kind of was like crying to her, and then I said to myself, like, this is kind of ridiculous. Like, okay, you could cry about this for a couple of days, and then you have to just like cut it out. It's done. Yeah, things are not great, but now you have to just look forward and see what the opportunity is, even if you don't know what the hell it is. So as we were talking, I I really just tried to see the other side of things, which is that this is long overdue, I think, and it's probably a nudge in another direction that maybe I've just been avoiding for a while. And she was pointing out that I've been saying I'm leaving California for pretty much years, and all of this time when I was getting really, like I had a really high income and disposable income, I probably would never have left here if things were to stay that way. So I think she's right, that I just would have stayed comfortable and not made any new moves. And I think it's been a really pretty long time since I've had any like substantial financial issues that are like to this degree. It's been quite a long time. And when I look around me now, like the way that things are right this moment, like I have this house, it's full of stuff. I'm in a beautiful neighborhood. I have a lot of friends that I really care about. I didn't know them 5 years ago when I moved to this area, and all that is great, but maybe I'm just being signaled left and right. Like it's just crazy, all the things that are happening. Maybe that's happening for a reason, and it's not a bad thing. Even though it makes me really sad to think about leaving here, maybe it is just a chain in the link of my good. I don't know. So I have to think, or I choose to think, that all of this like stuff coming down at one time is some kind of intelligent design. And maybe that's just how it's supposed to be. So I told her, well, I think Mississippi is warm. I could live there. She's like, you're not moving to Mississippi. That's not happening. So I guess that's off the table, but I'll figure it out. I mean, it's not the first time I've had to do this. It's just been a very long time. I think ages ago when I left the East Coast, for the first time, I had nothing when I left there. You know, I remember I got a call from my friend Brian one day, and he was like, hey, what are you doing? He's like, I live in Arizona now, and I'm traveling the country on a wagon train with these juvenile offenders. And it's like a reformatory program, and you would be great here. You should apply for the job. And I was like, what, you're doing what? You're on a wagon train? So he said, yeah, you know, you can totally apply. It's this great company. It's called Vision Quest. So anyway, I looked them up, and the open position that they had was TP parent, where you'd be living in a literal TP with the juvenile offenders once they get to, I guess, that step, whatever. So anyway, I applied for the job, and my friend Mike applied for the job. We both got hired. And before I went, I remember watching the video about the place with my parents, and it looked so promising. And they, it looked great. So anyway, Mike and I flew out to Arizona together, and we get to this place, and it's, you know, in the middle of nowhere in Arizona. And the setup was like military style barracks. So like all the workers would, I guess, live there in these like bunk beds, and they pretty much looked depressed, but I just ignored it. I was like, well, that's okay. You know, I'll be living in a teepee soon, so this is fine. And I didn't know this when I got there, but later I found out that the turnover rate for the staff there was like 140%. So in other words, no one stayed. And when we did get there, we were kind of like, they were showing us around, and then we were pretty quickly greeted by these 5 people dressed in like military fatigues. And they said they wanted to welcome us and like have a powwow and just, you know, welcome us to Vision Quest. So myself and this guy Mike and these 2 other new hires stood around this like circle of rocks that was in the middle of this area, and we had a powwow. And they welcomed us, and they also told us that due to some unforeseen circumstances, they were extremely short-staffed at the boot camp. The boot camp is where it's like the very first place that the juvenile offenders land when they get to the camp, like right from the courts. And then they get to like whatever it is, the TP camp, or then they go to the wagon train, and then ultimately they become Buffalo Soldiers, where they dress up in like these really cool outfits and like do these Native American dances, and they perform it for their parents. And so anyway, these 5 people told us that it was totally up to us. You know, we didn't have to do it, but they actually didn't need TP parents anymore. So now they needed drill sergeants. And would we like to stay and be drill sergeants with them, because they could really use the manpower? So if we decided not to become drill sergeants. That was fine, but then we would have to leave because they didn't need TP parents. If we stayed, we would have to like ramp up pretty quickly and like put on military fatigues and be ready to like storm into the mess hall to greet the new juvenile offenders when they got there. But the idea was we were going to have to like bust into the cafeteria while they were eating, catch them off guard, and get them out of there and into the like the TP boot camp area with all their bags and stuff. Side note was that these 5 military people that were in fatigues were actually ex-Marines. Like all of them. There were 2 females and 3 males. So essentially they wanted us to play dress up because they were low on military staff. So I didn't know what to do because I felt like someone had just said, well, we could like stab you to death or you could be like shot to death. Which do you prefer? And the thing was, I didn't want to go home after all of this because I already just left my job. I was in the middle of a relationship. I was like, hey, gotta go. And I had a dying family member. I left them. And I felt like if I had to go home after all this, I would just be a failure for life in my eyes. So we reluctantly decided to stay and help them. And they were like, oh, you're not going to regret it. And so for the next day, they pretty much trained us on like psychological military tactics. And they gave us our uniforms and like these big black military boots and like military hat. And I was like, how in the hell? I was supposed to be a TP parent. Like just helping, just being a nurturer. So when I asked one of them, so what kind of crimes did the juvenile offenders, like, what had they committed? They were like, oh, mostly battery, murder, anything you would see in a normal prison. But I guess they have 2 choices. When they come to the camp, they can either go to the prison lockup, which is like for juveniles, or they can come here for rehabilitation. Naturally, like who is not going to choose this place for rehabilitation? So we were going to be lucky enough to meet them. And so the next morning, we put on all our outfits and we couldn't stop laughing because we're like, what did we get ourselves into? And there was one more military meeting the next morning, and they kept telling us, don't worry, all you have to do is storm into the kitchen or where they're eating, and we'll all be there. Just start yelling and don't stop. And if anything goes wrong, we're going to be there to help you. That was a little consolation because I don't have any military training, and I know my friend didn't either. I think the highest military rank that I have accomplished was Girl Scout. And I wasn't even a good Girl Scout. I didn't want to help anyone at that age. I just wanted to get more of those buttons like you accumulate that you put them on your sash. That was like my whole purpose. So anyway, we agreed. So we got ready to go and my stomach totally dropped out. I told the big guy, I was like, hey, they try to kill us. You better protect us. He said, don't you worry. So we get toward the cafeteria and I look in and I can see in the window there's like, 75 guys with shaved heads sitting at these big tables just eating. Things were pretty quiet. I'm like, are we sure we want to disturb this like hornet's nest? So they were like, don't worry, you're going to be fine. We got you. So the biggest Marine guy gets us outside the door and he's like, are you guys ready? And I said, no. I was like, I'm not. He's like, don't worry, we got you. So anyway, he busts open the door and we all start running in and screaming at these kids and like circling them. I immediately turned into a different person. I was pretty impressed myself, mainly because my life depended on it and I didn't want to die. And my parents didn't even know that I had switched jobs from TP parent, and I don't know that they'd be thrilled about that. And I would hate for them to find out that I sucked at my job, but then I died on top of it. So I don't really know what came over me, but I was screaming bloody murder at these guys. And they seemed genuinely stunned. So I look over at the big Marine guy at one point, and he's going insanely crazy. He's screaming at them, and he's saying stuff like, don't you eyeball me. You listen to me, boy. So I was like, well, that might be a good time for me to switch up my script. And then I was like, you know what? Don't do that. That'll get you killed. So I just said things like, get up and like go clean up your tray, put it away. And I probably said, God help me a few times, but it didn't really matter what we were screaming. I don't know that they understood what we were saying. They seemed to be listening, and they did get up, and we eventually yelled them out of the mess hall and into the like desert to get their bags. And we just kept yelling at them until they got to the TP camp. And then at some point, I think some of them started mouthing off, but then the military guy would get in their face again and like and set them straight. And then some of the littler guys, the little offenders, were crying, which I felt really bad about. But, you know, at the end of the day, it was like 5 solid hours of this. And these kids were exhausted and we were exhausted and no one died. So we went back to the barracks and apparently I was quite convincing. And the Marines were like, congratulations, you guys were so great. We look forward to working with you guys some more. And I was like, I don't think that's going to happen. And I pretty much quit like the next day. But as it turned out, I had nowhere to go. All I knew was I couldn't go home and I had no money. And incidentally, shortly after that, one of the workers came up. I don't know what she did there, but she introduced herself to me and her name was Angel. I know, like, it was perfect. She told me that she was heading to Tucson for the weekend and she would take me there and I could stay with her and one of her friends, which I did. And then that got me set up in Tucson, where I was there for 2 years before I got to California, where I am now. I heard later that 2 days after we left, there was a riot and one of the girl Marines got her nose broken. So there's that. But you could say that the girl Angel and that camp, like that whole thing, that those were both a chain in the link of my good. I would never have planned that out for myself. I will never repeat that. But when I think about it now, it's really funny to me. I'm really grateful for that time that I spent there. It gave me an experience and like it gave me a perspective I never would have had and that I never would like to have again. But I guess all this to say that whatever's going on with you in particular, whatever's going on with me, whatever's going on with this crazy price dropping and not really budging no matter what has been happening, and you're not sure what will happen, maybe it's, you know, a chain in the link or a link in the chain. I can never say that right, of your good. And maybe it's just a temporary opportunity to buy it. I don't know. Later, when we all look back at this, we might be grateful for this. I don't know.